Hey everybody, it's Eric, coming at you from my dimly lit room. So I recently made this Gatsby site that'll tell you when you're going to be a millionaire in various currencies. So let's just say I have $1,000 right now. I calculate and voila, I'm a millionaire in Indonesia. So I recently went to Bali and I got to the airport and I took out like 5 million rupees and I was like, I'm rich. So that's why I wanted to make this website right here, just to kind of give you an idea of how rich you are around the world. It's just kind of something I did for fun. But if you're saving up money, you can say, hey, I want to make my next goal to become a millionaire in Japan, and set that as your next savings goal. So that was kind of the idea behind this website. And it was pretty easy to build with Gatsby, but what I did need to do is grab all these currency rates. And what I did was I used an exchange rate API called Fixer. And so what Fixer does is you tell it that you want some exchange rates, and it gives you back all these relative to, say, US dollars or something. So I wanted to use this with Gatsby, and if you've been using Gatsby for any time, you know that you get the data from GraphQL. So, for example, if I wanted the title, the description, and the author for this current website I have, you just write a GraphQL query like this, and then it would return this for you. Now, I wanted to do that with exchange rates with this Fixer API, but I needed to convert it to a GraphQL query. So, Gatsby already comes with a bunch of Gatsby source plugins out of the box. Like, for example, you can go to their plugins directory and see all their different Gatsby source plugins. For example, with this one, you can get all your posts from Instagram and easily get that into your GraphQL, write a query, and you're done. It's that easy. But there wasn't really a good one for Fixer or any other good exchange rate APIs. So I was just thinking, okay, I'm just going to make my own. How hard could it be? And it's not actually very hard. So let me kind of walk you through how I did it. So let me go out here. So for my projects directory, I just created a new Gatsby site with Gatsby new Gatsby source tutorial. That's just what I'm calling my tutorial. Take it or leave it. So I already did that. I'm going to go into Gatsby source tutorial. And this is just out of the box Gatsby, the Gatsby default starter. And I'm going to make a new directory called plugins, which is where any custom plugins that you write are going to go. Okay, and then you want to go into your plugins directory, cd into plugins, and we're going to make Gatsby source fixer. So you basically call it Gatsby source and then whatever you're getting your data from. So in my case, fixer. So we now have Gatsby source fixer. Let's go in there. Gatsby source fixer. And then we're going to want to initialize npm in here and create a package.json. So you can do that pretty easily by just doing npm init. And it's going to ask you all these questions, but you can just hit enter on all these. All right, and now we have our package.json inside here. So I'm going to open up VS Code. Actually, I'm going to open VS Code for the whole project. So let me just go back here and then open VS Code right here. All right. So we're going to want to go into the plugins. And pretty much the only file you need to get a Gatsby source plugin up and running is the Gatsby Node.js. So I'm going to go and create that. And let me grab the basic boilerplate that you want to put in here. So this is pretty much how you're going to start all Gatsby source plugins. If you want to follow along in like a written version of this, Gatsby has a pretty good tutorial on how to make a source plugin right here. So I kind of followed along with this when I was making mine. Let's go back here. And I'll explain all this in a minute. So basically we're getting source nodes, which is a Gatsby API. And it runs this API before building everything. So it gets the data first and builds the nodes. And the nodes are in GraphQL. So it'll put each exchange rate in a little node that you can loop through and grab each exchange rate from. So you can see that in action a little bit later. But you'll need all these right here. These are just a couple of helper functions that we'll use later on. Actions is where we're going to get create node from. So here we're just destructuring create node so we can use that later. And finally, config options is what you're going to pass in the Gatsby config. So Gatsby config over here, some plugins just have the plugin right here, but some will include options. So we're going to pass one options into ours. So that's what config options will return, just an object of all of these options. And besides that, we're just deleting something that we're not going to use. And then finally, we're just console logging, testing my plugin, so we can just see if it works or not. So let me go into Gatsby config and add our plugin. If you don't do this, it's not going to work. So Gatsby source fixer, and if it's in the plugins directory, Gatsby will automatically get that for you. So make sure it's in the plugins directory. And we do want to add some options, so let me just copy this. Gatsby source fixer. And then we're only going to have one options for now, and that's the access key. So that's going to be the API key that fixer needs. And I'm going to make that process.n.fixer API key. And that's just so that you don't see my fixer API key. I mean, if you're doing this for yourself, you can just copy and paste the API key right here. And as long as it's working, it'll work. But I have that in an environment variable. So let's just see if it works right now. So if everything works, we should get testing my plugin and then the API key. Okay, I don't want you to see my API key, so I'm just going to replace this for now with fake API. So let's go over here. Let's say Gatsby develop. And here we go. It's right here, testing my plugin, and the access key is fake API. So that's a success. Although, as you can see, the Gatsby source fixer has generated no Gatsby nodes. So it's not really doing anything right now. But what we can do is get the API up and running. So we want to put in these two libraries right here. And these are just going to be some helper functions to make some things easier. This is going to be the fetch API, so we can fetch from the API. So let me just cancel out of this and install these two. So I'm going to use yarn add node fetch and query string. Install those. And then we're going to use fetch right down here. So I'm going to use async await so that we don't have to wait for these, and these can kind of run in the background. So I'm going to, let's get the response, const response equals await. Fetch, and then the API URL. So let's make the API URL first. Let's make API options first. And this is going to be, we're going to turn the config options object into a string because, let me show you the fixer API. So the fixer API expects you to send in, expects you to query this data.fixer.io/API, and then it wants you to pass in the access key equals the API key. And so query string is going to take this object and convert it into a string. So we can just paste it in after the API URL. So what we're going to do is query string dot stringify config options, and that'll turn that into a string. So we'll get API or access key equals whatever. And then we're going to take the URL, API URL, and just make that this data.fixture.io/API/latest. Then we need to pass in the API key, API options, and then we're going to fetch this. And then from that, we're going to say constant JSON, or let's say constant data, is just going to be the response .json, and we're going to await that. And finally, let's console log all the data to make sure it's working. Okay, so let me go back to Gatsby config and put in my real API key. Okay, and let's do Gatsby develop to make sure it's running. If everything's working properly, we should get all the data from the API here in the console log. And it's working. So here are all the different currencies with their exchange rate relative to the euro. So that looks pretty good. But now we need to get this into the GraphQL so we can actually query it from there. So what we're going to do with this data is we're going to loop over each and every one of it and turn it into a Gatsby node. So I'm going to do that by doing, this is an object, not an array, so you can't use for each with it. What I'm going to do instead is object.keys, kind of turn it into an array right here. Data.rates, because we're just grabbing the rates object from here. We don't care about the date, timestamp, base. So grab that, object.keys, and then we can for each over that because it's an array now. So let's take each rate and then console.log. So we want to grab the value. So this is going to be the number, the exchange rate. And then we want to grab data.rates. Here, let me just make this easier and say constant rates equals data.rates. Or we can just destructure this from data. All right, so we can just go over rates. And this is getting a little bit confusing right here because I'm not really sure what this is just off the bat. It's a little bit confusing. So let me make some more variables to make this more readable. It's always a little bit nice because you're going to come back to your code in like 2 months and you're going to have no idea what your code does. So it's good just to make it as easy as possible to read. So let's say constant currency name is going to be the rates object, and that'll get the currency name, and then currency rate will just be the rate. So let's see if that works. Currency name, currency rate. Let's see if we're getting what we're expecting. Okay. I think I messed it up a little bit. Yeah, this is supposed to be the other way around. That's why it's good to save these as variables so we actually know which is which. Okay, so that'll display the currency name first and then the currency rate. And those are the only variables that we really need to put into GraphQL. So after that, we can get started on turning them into actual Gatsby nodes. So that all looks good right there. Got the currency name and the currency exchange rate. So instead of console.logging this, we're going to create a function up here. Let's call it process rate. And this is going to process the rate into an actual Gatsby node. We're just going to take the currency name, currency rate, make that an arrow function. And then let me copy the Gatsby node boilerplate down here. Alright, so this is the basic Gatsby node code. And it's a little bit complicated, but let me explain it to you. So first off, we need to create an individual ID, and basically each node has to have a unique identifier. So each currency name is different, so we can just put currency name in there. And then we need to actually create the node, like what content is going to be in each of these nodes. So let's create an object, constant node, and then we're going to say currency name, and then currency rate. So it's going to get the currency name and give it the currency name, and then currency rate. And it'll just make that an object that'll then be inside the Gatsby node. I'll show you later once it gets made into a node. So we got this node right here. And so for the node content, you just have to pass in the node as a string. So we're going to stringify that. And then node data is going to be the node plus all the metadata that Gatsby needs to make it work behind the scenes. So we're going to pass in the node right here. It's going to get the node ID, parent, there's no parent, children, there's no children. Internal, this is going to be the name for the schema. So let's call it fixer rate. Whenever we want to query a fixer rate, this is what we'll use. So if we want to get all fixer rates, we'll type in all fixer rate into the GraphQL query. You'll see that a little bit later. Content, node content, which is it as a string. And then it just uses this function, create content digest. Just pass in the node right there. That's just for internal use for Gatsby. And that's what these functions are for up here. Just helper functions to help Gatsby create it. And then finally, after that, we return the node data. So we're going to put in the currency name, currency rate, and get back a Gatsby node. So instead of console.logging this, we're just going to say, we're going to use this create node that we get from actions. So let's create node, process, rate, currency name, currency rate. And if that works, then we should see that inside our GraphQL. Let's see if it works. All right, and we can go into GraphQL and see if it's working. Let's delete all of this. And then on the side, you can see we have all fixer rate and fixer rate. So we're now good to query these. Let's try this just to make sure it works. Edges, node, and we're going to want to get currency name and currency rate from each of these. And as you can see, it's returning all of these. All right, so that's pretty successful. And so what I wanted to do with this website is just like loop through all of these and just display all of them. So it's pretty easy to do from here. We just want to go into, let's say, our main page. And we can just display this right on the home page. So let's make a GraphQL query. Let's see, use static query and GraphQL. Got to get that from Gatsby to make the GraphQL query work. Make this return. And then let's get the data, constant data equals use static query. GraphQL. I think this is the right syntax. Let me see if I remember. And then we can basically just copy and paste this query in. So query fixer rates. It's going to go all fixer rates, and basically exactly what we had over here. So here we can map over these. Data dot all fixer rate dot edges dot map, and we can just structure out the node from each one of these edges. And then let's say we want to return a div with, let's bold this, currency name, node.currency name, followed by the currency rate. Let's see if that works. Okay, let me see. I might have written this wrong. Okay. I forgot to wrap this with the parentheses for the arrow function to work properly. Okay, so that should work now. And there we go. So we got all these currencies, the exchange rate based on the euro, and that's it. That's how you make a custom Gatsby source plugin. So that was pretty simple. Now what I did is I made it a little bit more complicated for my use case, because I also want to get the emoji, want to get the country, the actual name of the currency, not just the abbreviation. And so what I did is, here, let me go to the full project. And I have this on my GitHub if you want to see. But I have, am I a millionaire yet? Open this up in Visual Studio Code. And so I have a countries.json file. So I'm getting all of these, all this info that I compiled together. And inside Gatsby Node, I'm basically just doing the exact same thing with Fixer, but I'm also combining it with the countries. So I'm also using Node.js to get the countries.json file, bring that into here, convert it to base USD, and then I'm throwing in all this extra information into the node. So country name, emoji, currency name, currency ID, just basically putting a little bit more into it. So you can basically make it as complex as you need to be. You can pull in data from a lot of different places and kind of combine it into one node, which is really nice. That makes it a lot more convenient than, alternatively you just be kind of working with all these different APIs and trying to make it fit together. Whereas with Gatsby, you just put it into one node, query that, and that's it. Super simple. So I really like working with Gatsby and how easy it makes it with GraphQL. Just a really great developer experience. So I hope you learned something. And if you did, leave a like on the video or something. I don't know what YouTubers are saying these days. Have a good one.